first of all, of course, I would like to ask you, Mr. Yang, because China just recently made public this list of embargoes against the DPRK. Many really wonder why 1 month after the DPRK tested the latest round that China made such public statement.
Well, the latest announcement or list, we call it as a blacklist. The blacklist was made, you mentioned, one month later, because after the 2270 resolution, the Chinese-related governmental agencies need to study thorough to scope what kind of items should be put into the sanction regime, and then make a result. So the announcement of the blacklist is the results of products stemming from the 2017 resolution that really reflects Chinese governmental serious attitudes and commitment to the implementing the resolution.
Having said that, though, Mr. Walsh, we understand there are certain concerns from the international community, particularly from Washington, suggesting that, well, the Chinese list, that black list, only suggests about the so-called military and nuclear-related materials. However, sometimes certain materials could be bio-use in a way, both military and also for daily consumptions. So is that blacklist coming from China as satisfying to the others? Will any blacklist coming from China about DPRK in any way satisfying to anyone?
Well, it's a good question. I think most of my colleagues, U.S., elsewhere in the region, are probably a little skeptical about whether China would shut off coal and iron ore imports, because that would have, if done broadly, would have a crippling impact on North Korea. And China doesn't want to have a failed state on its border, let alone a nuclear failed state. So I think most people are skeptical about how broadly this will be enforced. Remember, there is this sort of big loophole that you just referred to, which is, you know, exports or revenue that goes to the people for humanitarian purposes, daily living, that's fine. It's the revenue that goes to the WMD programs that you're supposed to stop. But if you have a lump of coal in your hand, how are you able to tell whether the sale of that lump of coal is going for the people or going for a missile program?
And therefore,
in any case, it's a centralized economy.
But as a result of what you just said, that this piece of coal, would the opinion coming from Washington is to ban all the coal exports to DPRK, no matter whether the people there had to experience winter or not?
I think that's the best question I've been asked about this in the last several months, because certainly some of the things that Ambassador Powers said in the UN around this resolution, the two different statements connected together would at least suggest that as a possibility. She said, we have to shut down coal and iron ore sales because it helps the missile programs, and then she sort of went on to suggest that because it's the DPRK and it's a centralized economy, everything ends up in the same place anywhere. That would seem to imply more broad sanctions, but I can't believe anyone is going to go along with sanctions that would have the impact of possibly tipping North Korea over, from a fragile state to a failed state or failing state. So I just remain fundamentally skeptical that people are going to do that.
Yes, well, you are, Mr. Walsh, remain skeptical about that, but many have been always skeptical about China's determination or China's intention or China's eventual implementation of all of this blacklist, Mr. Yang. So do you think from China and Beijing's perspective, do you need to explain? Or actually the sanctions it's the sanction itself, no matter what people think?
Well, I think China always is quite unfair, it seems to me, especially from my past experience as a diplomat. China is also be treated as an unfair situation. In the last resolution in 2013, there was some similar spectacle against China about China's determination, China's sincerity to implement the resolution. But the fact was and is, China at that time, you just now you said the Commerce of China issued a blacklist. The 3 years ago, the several governmental agencies did similar things. Quite a long list, blacklist, including more than 900 items, dual-used goods, ban all of them from exporting to North Korea.
Right.
And the implementation, the record of implementation was good. And you can look at the record through the statistics from the custom, from many other resources.
Okay, well, here's the thing, Mr. Yang. You could complain why people are always skeptical about China when it comes to its determination on make sure it's going to be a nuclear weapon-free, Korean Peninsula. But there are international media reports suggesting on the border between China and the DPRK, enormous amount of, as they say, smuggling going on. And therefore, all of these materials and the blacklist that may not necessarily work because you got goods going on anyway. So on the one hand, of course, people have their version of the story. But from the other perspective, what has China done? And how is China going to face up to these kind of criticism?
Well, firstly, the amount of the normal trade relating to such goods and the amount of the smuggling or barter trade is quite different. Very big in the normal trade. Regarding to the barter trade along the boundary area, it's quite a small amount. So even with the continuation of the smuggling, the major part of the trade has been stopped.
Of course,
number
that's
one.
the official source.
And then number two, China has strengthened the enforcement of cracking down the smuggling activities along the border areas. Even some foreign reporters said during the Dandong, that is the border
the city bordering the DPRK from China.
The suddenly decrease of the transportation between the two sides. That's one of the reflection of China's implementation, China's determination on the sanction
All right.
resolution.
Having said that, we make clear what China's positions are and how is China going to face those criticisms. Let's go to the other side of the story. Have many other parties also been acting responsible, at least as they claim to be? Mr. Walsh, of course you are not representing the U.S. government, but here we're having an intellectual debate, which is, China was suggesting for the last few months, and also after China signed on to the embargo against the DPRK 2270 Security Council resolution, China said it very clear, it has to be dual track. On the one hand, sanctions. On the other hand, has to be negotiations, has to be real effort for discussion. And even, Mr. Walsh, interesting news coming from DPRK yesterday suggesting DPRK feeling it's extremely important for negotiations. So has Washington and some of the others received this message? If they receive this message, should they jump on it? What kind of actions should they have at this moment if they really want it to be dual track?
Yeah, well, I agree that you have to have negotiations. Sanctions by themselves are not going to resolve this. And in your earlier report, a Chinese official said the Iran agreement was an example of that, and I agree totally. I seem to be getting different reports from different quarters that suggest that the North Koreans have approached the Americans about negotiating, that the Americans have floated counter ideas for negotiation. I would welcome that. I think the main way to get there is to drop preconditions, and whether the negotiations are maybe about a peace agreement, to end the armistice, or whether there are the six-party talks over the nuclear issue in particular. I think the way to start them is just simply for the parties to begin talking rather than listing preconditions that either side, either dropping the exercises or...
Well, Mr. Walsh, you have to wait because we are talking about setting preconditions. That's exactly what happened over the past few years, if not more than 10 years.
Saying
not saying. Okay, that's very important because, Mr. Yang, let's come back to you. Preconditions has been the problem for all sides to come together. Everybody being consistent this time with their preconditions, and yet not necessarily move in any way toward a possibility, new possibility. But then without preconditions, what can the all sides talk about? And now you face an election season inside the United States. That's just the reality. What can be done?
Unfortunately, I don't think this year we can have some progresses through the negotiation because of one reason that you mentioned, that the campaign year. The other reason is the North and the South relations is getting more and more complicated rather than better than before. So given the background, I think the first thing is that all parties should make a joint effort to try to find out exit. So we need an exit strategy to come out of the current deadlock to return to the table.
Okay, if you talk about the exit strategy, tell us what could be those exit strategies, as you already mentioned the phrase.
Okay, so
one or two ideas, and I'm gonna throw it back to Mr. Walsh.
Two talks simultaneously going on. Say let's build up a cart with two wheels. One wheel is negotiations on the denuclearization, and the other wheel is a negotiation on the peace mechanism or peace regime. And North Korea now focus on the peace treaty only with the United States, and all the other parties insist on denuclearization. So let's do the same because the two issues are linked actually.
Well, Mr. Walsh, you got 1 minute also left for you to talk about the exit strategy. If you want to use other phrase, that's fine too. But some inspirations for us at least.
Well, I agree with my colleague in Beijing about that. I think, though, it's really, really important. We can't end this conversation without saying immediately in front of us is the DPRK May Party Congress. And I think a lot of people are expecting some things that are going to make life more difficult rather than easier for negotiations. In fact, I would argue that even though I'm skeptical about the impact of the announcements about the embargo, I think they're important. I think China is sort of leaning forward and not even reacting to the test as much as sending a signal about the future, because that May Party Congress could be a very volatile time, and North Korea could engage in several provocations. So I think we're all looking out about a month from now, and that will help determine what will happen in the months and years after.
Final words from you, Mr. Yang, very briefly, 30 seconds if you can. China, of course, is doing this UN Security Council resolution, embargo and blacklist and everything. But on the other hand, the China DPRK, traditional allies for many decades. But now, will China lose its position with DPRK as China getting ever more harsher when it comes to sanctions, losing its influence over Pyongyang?
No. One reason is China's influence on Pyongyang actually always limited, so lose little. And on the other hand, North Korea has a very few ties with external world. So China is the most important tie with Pyongyang. So no matter what kind of measure China does, Pyongyang has to make the tie exist.